September 17th, 1862. As the sun slowly rises over the rolling farmland of western Maryland, a slow but steady thunder begins to rise as opposing artillery crews start locating their targets. At the Dunker Church, Major General Thomas Stonewall Jackson surveys the position one last time, knowing all too well the inevitable federal assault from the north is soon to begin. A few hundred feet away, men on the front line write their last few heartfelt letters to their loved ones, expecting that this morning will be their last on Earth. Despite this gloomy fate, they believe if they are victorious this day, England and France may join them in their cause, swinging the war solidly in their favor, a notion worth dying for. As they scribble their last few intimate words on paper, the men start to hear the thud of thousands of boots slowly marching toward their line, accompanied by the faint shouts of men. A few look up to see a long line of blue move in their direction in perfect marching order with flags flying overhead. The time has come. For the Confederates, it is time to do or die. General Hooker has commenced his attack on the Dunker Church. The Battle of Antietam has begun. Have you ever wanted to join the ranks of either the Blue or Gray as they fight for victory in the Maryland campaign? Now you can with War of Rights, a multiplayer game that is set during the tumultuous times of the fall of 1862. In War of Rights, you can fight over the fields of Antietam, the hillsides of South Mountain, or over the streets of Harpers Ferry in the battles that feature hundreds of players. War of Rights features the glorious and gruesome parts of the period, such as over 60 playable regiments, with historically accurate uniforms, weapons, and formations. Want to play various roles? War of Rights offers various infantry, dismounted cavalry, and artillery ranks that allows for unique styles of gameplay. If you are a big fan of the Civil War, I highly recommend you try out War of Rights today. As night falls over the bloody slopes of South Mountain on September 14, 1862, the exhausted men of Lee's rearguard have done all they can, but only barely staved off total defeat in the face of McClellan's re-energized Federals. Even with holding on to 2 of the 3 gaps, the Confederates will be unable to maintain their position with their northern flank compromised when light arrives in the morning. With the rest of his division scattered throughout Maryland, and only a few thousand on hand, the only thing Lee can do now is save his army from this uncharacteristically aggressive Federal army. With a flurry of dispatches, Lee orders the scattered divisions to rally at the quiet little town of Sharpsburg to recross the Potomac back into Virginia. Despite much anticipation for his invasion of the North that could have ultimately swung the war in the favor of the Confederacy, subsequent events have gone south, and thus Lee's army needs to follow suit. Yet just as his men are pulling out of the South Mountain gaps, a message arrives from Major General Thomas Jackson declaring that the Federal garrison at Harpers Ferry will soon surrender. Upon reading the letter, Lee realizes that if the Federal garrison surrenders in a timely manner, Jackson's divisions will be free to rejoin the army at Sharpsburg, enabling Lee to concentrate his scattered forces and offer battle to McClellan on the northern side of the Potomac, potentially allowing the general to finally capture the elusive victory on northern soil that he has been seeking. Instead of continuing his retreat across the Potomac, Lee sends out a fresh set of orders to rally at Sharpsburg and deploys his units into a line of battle, ready to delay the advancing Federal host as long as possible until Jackson's men arrive. Meanwhile, when morning finally comes at South Mountain, the Federals discover their defeated foe has vanished. Not wanting his victory to go to waste, McClellan issues orders for an immediate pursuit of the Confederates. He sends the 1st, 2nd, and 12th Corps down the National Pike, while the 5th and 9th Corps move down the old Sharpsburg Road. In Pleasant Valley, McClellan sends the 6th Corps and Couch's division of 4th Corps to march up the Potomac River and block Lee's rear. If all corps do their part, Lee will be surrounded on the northern side of the Potomac. Yet the overcautious Major General William B. Franklin stalls in front of Harpers Ferry, unwilling to press the enemy. As the Federals march after the retreating foe, Hooker reports to McClellan that the rebel army is in a perfect panic. While the jubilant Federals march, rumors swirl about the devastating losses they had inflicted upon the Confederates. All they expect now is to march after the demoralized rebel army and easily push it across the Potomac. While both armies march west towards Sharpsburg, Federal troopers scoop up hundreds of stragglers and clash with the rear guard of the Confederate army. However, when the Federal troopers near Sharpsburg, they are shocked to see what stands in front of the town. A mile-long Confederate battle line standing defiantly in full view. When McClellan receives word, he is dumbfounded. Despite bloodying the Confederates the previous day, here they stand ready to fight again. Confounded by Lee's move, McClellan decides to concentrate his forces east of the town and deal with its unexpected host the next day. By the time darkness comes on September 15th, both sides are gearing up for what is to be the climactic fight of the campaign along a meandering creek called Antietam. With only an initial force of 15,000 men on hand, Lee's bluff holds back the Army of the Potomac. As the Federals move into place and trade artillery fire, Lee receives more good news. Jackson's letter declaring the surrender of Harpers Ferry arrives. The news of the surrender confirms Lee's decision to offer battle in the north and prepares his army for the upcoming fight. By the morning of the 16th, Lee has a majority of his army concentrated in and around Sharpsburg, ready to fight the growing Federal host across the creek. The town of Sharpsburg is an ideal place for Lee to make a stand. Antietam Creek provides a natural water barrier between the two forces, and is only crossable at 3 stone bridges, named the Upper, Middle, and Lower Bridges. The creek also has some places where it can be easily forded, such as Price and Snavely's Fords. The region includes a good network of roads and farm lanes that allows Lee to use interior lines to move his men quickly from one end of the battlefield to the other. The rolling hills and surrounding farm lanes also provide good concealment and even some protection from Federal artillery fire. Yet, despite the strong defensive position, Lee's position has some inherent risk. Lee does not have enough men to adequately anchor his position, which forms a huge bend around Sharpsburg. The Confederates only have one escape route across the Potomac at Bottler's Ford. If it is blocked, Lee's army will be cut off from Virginia. Despite all these risks, Lee has full confidence in his men. Lee places Jackson's left wing along with Brigadier General John Bell Hood's division north of the town straddling the Hagerstown Turnpike. In the middle of Jackson's lines stand a whitewashed brick church known as the Dunkard Church, which belongs to a sect of German Baptists known as the Dunkards. Jackson's left flank is protected by Stuart's cavalry atop Nicodemus Hill, while Longstreet's wing anchors his right. Lee tasked Longstreet's right wing with holding the center and southern part of the field straddling the Boonesboro Pike. Longstreet stations D.H. Hill's division in a country lane that has been weathered down by years of use and is known locally as the Sunken Road, while Generals Richard H. Anderson and David R. Jones spread their divisions south of the town to defend the middle and lower bridges, with the remainder of Stuart's cavalry anchoring the right flank. Once all the preparations are complete, Lee's battle line consists of 35,000 men and stretches 4 miles long. Opposite the Confederate army on the eastern side of the Antietam, McClellan organizes the Army of the Potomac for battle. On his right flank near the upper bridge stands Major General Joseph Hooker's 1st Corps. To Hooker's left flank is Major General Edwin V. Sumner's 2nd Corps. In the center of the Union line is Major General Fitzjohn Porter's 5th Corps and Brigadier General Alfred Pleasanton's Cavalry Division facing the middle bridge. Holding McClellan's left flank is the joint command of Generals Ambrose Burnside's and Jacob D. Cox's 9th Corps. Behind Sumner's 2nd Corps is the 12th Corps under Major General Joseph K. Mansfield, who had only just assumed command 2 days prior. McClellan has 75,000 men on hand for the battle, with another 19,000 throughout Maryland slowly making their way toward the field. At the start of the battle, McClellan will have more than a 2-to-1 advantage in manpower over the Confederates. Despite holding the momentum, McClellan fails to issue a comprehensive plan to his subordinates. Instead, the general issues separate orders to each of his corps individually. In the northern sector, McClellan tasks Hooker's 1st Corps, supported by Mansfield's 12th Corps, to attack Lee's left flank. In the southern sector, Burnside's 9th Corps will attack Lee's right flank. Once both assaults are underway, McClellan will then send the rest of the army to administer the coup de grace to finish off the rebels. Once all is ready, McClellan gets his plan in motion by ordering Hooker across Antietam Creek to line up his corps at Joseph Poffenberger's farm, just north of Lee's left flank. However, not everything goes to plan. Brigadier General George G. Meade's Pennsylvania Reserves, who are protecting Hooker's left flank as they march, get into a sharp firefight with Hood's division, which is currently stationed in the East Woods. The skirmish lights up the dimming sky and attracts artillery fire from both sides, and only ends with darkness extinguishes the fighting. Despite drawing much attention from both sides, the sharp skirmish in the East would have revealed McClellan's intentions to Lee, which allows the Confederate general to reorient his lines to face this new threat from the north. Undeterred by the commotion, McClellan further strengthens his right by sending forward Mansfield's 12th Corps in Hooker's path to support his assault in the morning. Meanwhile, in the East Woods, Hood gains permission to pull his men back to the Dunker Church to cook some much needed food in the morning, with the stipulation they come at the double quick when called. For the rest of the night, pickets and the occasional artillery bursts keep the two armies awake. As men on both sides try to sleep, others prepare themselves for the coming battle, writing letters home and readying themselves for the hell that will break loose in the morning. When light first crests the foggy morning sky on Wednesday, September 17, 1862, opposing artillery batteries kick off the battle by blazing away at each other. As the thunder commences, men on both sides start forming their battle lines in anticipation of the coming battle, knowing full well that Lee's invasion of the North hangs in the balance. At Poffenberger's farm, Hooker readies his men to open the infantry fight. Their attack will take them due south toward the Dunker Church, which sits on a prominent ridge along the axis of the Hagerstown Turnpike. Facing this impending onslaught is Jackson's left wing. At 5:30 a.m., the Federals and Hooker's 1st Corps step off and begin their advance down the Hagerstown Turnpike. As Hooker's men advance, the Pennsylvania Reserves renew their fight in the East Woods. With unfinished business from the previous night's fight, the Pennsylvanians fire with tenacity, battling the Georgians who replace Hood's men. Further west, as the divisions of Ricketts and Doubleday clear the North Woods, they become prime targets for Colonel Stephen D. Lee's artillery battalion stationed on the Dunker Church Ridge. This fire knocks out scores of men before they reach combat. As the columns advance, groups of mangled bodies are left in their wake. Leading Ricketts' division is Duryee's brigade, who, just after clearing the Cornfield, are hit with a wall of lead from Douglas's Confederates. Despite the carnage, the two sides battled out until both sides received reinforcements. On Duryee's left, the brigades of Christian and Hartsuff arrived to join him in the battle. Seeing his Georgians hang on by a thread, Lawton sends Hayes' Raleigh, Louisiana brigade to their support. With their blood up, Hayes' Tigers charge into the waiting Federals of Hartsuff's brigade. A savage melee breaks out at the southeastern corner of the Cornfield. The contest, however, does not last long as the Federal numbers become apparent, forcing the Tigers to give up their tenuous hold in the corn. Caught in the middle of this brutal fight is the 12th Massachusetts, who, by the end of the day, will lose 67% of its men, the highest amount for any Union regiment in the battle. As both sides retire, the eastern half of the front becomes a stalemate, leaving the dead and dying strewn about the field. Meanwhile, to the west, Doubleday begins his attack straddling the Hagerstown Turnpike. As they advance, they are enfiladed by Stuart's horse artillery atop Nicodemus Hill, and in the front by S.D. Lee's battalion, who knocks out entire ranks of men. Many Federals complain about the artillery fire, but nobody takes the initiative to silence the guns. Despite suffering immensely, the Federal infantry are not the only ones stuck in the storm of lead, as the rebels in the Westwoods also lose men from long-range artillery fire. Among the wounded is Brigadier General John R. Jones, who is hit by a shell, forcing Brigadier General William E. Stark to assume command of the division. Unfortunately for the Confederate gunners, they are unable to respond to the long-range Parrott rifles firing safely beyond their range across the Antietam. This frustration leads Colonel S.D. Lee to remember Antietam as artillery hell. On the Union right, Gibbon's Western Iron Brigade leads Doubleday's advance through the corn, but is ambushed by two small Virginia brigades under Colonel Grigsby. The fight does not last long, and the thin Confederates flee into the West Woods, with Patrick's New Yorkers in hot pursuit. As Gibbon's Westerners clear the corn, they're met by a wall of bullets from the remnants of Douglas's brigade, still holding desperately onto the pasture. Major Rufus Dawes of the 6th Wisconsin, who was in the corn, recalled, "Men, I cannot say fell, they were knocked out by the ranks by dozens." The surviving Federals reform and push on as a mass of men from Phelps and Gibbon's brigades, routing the stubborn Confederate defenders. Seeing this repulse, General Stark leads a counterattack out of the West Woods. The Louisianians rush out and swing towards the Hagerstown Turnpike, where they flank the Iron Brigade, stopping their advance. Despite this vicious flanking fire, the Westerners turn and respond with a destructive volley. The Confederates desperately hang on to their position until they're hit in the rear by the arriving Federals of Patrick's New Yorkers. Soon, Stark and many of his men are shot, forcing the few survivors to make a dash for the woods. Stark's wound, however, proves fatal, forcing Colonel Andrew J. Grigsby to take command of Jackson's division, becoming his third commander in less than 2 hours. Witnessing the intense pressure that Jackson's command is facing, Lee pulls various brigades north from Longstreet's wing to supplement the northern sector. With a crisis unfolding to his front, and unable to stop this unrelenting Federal advance, Jackson finally calls on Hood and his tiny division to the front. While the front line is engaging in a life-or-death struggle for the cornfield, Hood's men have been casually preparing breakfast in the woods behind the Dunker Church, just as the orders to form ranks arrive at 7 a.m. Enraged at losing their chance to eat their first warm meal in days, Wofford's Texans and Lost Mississippians storm out from behind the church and unleash a devastating volley into the exhausted ranks of Doubleday's men, forcing the Westerners back through the corn. Seeing this sudden reversal, Hooker calls on Mansfield to join the fight for the church. The victorious Confederates follow the retreating Federals and continue their drive deep into Miller's cornfield. Law's men slant right and attack the arriving brigades of Meade's Pennsylvania reserves, while Wofford's Texans supplant themselves on the left flank in the corn. The 1st Texans, with their blood up, recklessly continuing their assault deeper into the corn. Soon, a combination of rifle and artillery fire shreds the Texans' ranks, forcing the survivors to flee in disorder, leaving both of their flags in the field along with their dead. After only 20 minutes of fighting, the 1st Texas suffered 82.6% casualties, becoming the highest percentage loss by any regiment on either side during the entire war. Though Hood's division suffered immensely in their counterattack, their efforts stabilized Jackson's line. After their attack ran out of steam, the remnants of Hood's division retreated back to the West Woods, allowing for a momentary lull to consume the blood-swept cornfield. After extracting his men from the front, a fellow officer asks Hood where his division is. He replies simply with, "Dead on the field." By 7:30 a.m., after 2 hours of desperate fighting, both Jackson's left wing and Hooker's First Corps are wrecked. While the survivors rest and recuperate, reinforcements on both sides flood into the area, picking up the fight. As the last of Doubleday's men retire north from the front, Mansfield's 12th Corps arrives to reinforce their battered comrades. However, half of these men are green, including Major General Joseph K. Mansfield himself. Mansfield, though a career soldier of 40 years, had no recent combat experience. Worried that his raw recruits will break once they reach combat, he marches his men to the front in a column of brigades, which presents a wonderful target for Confederate artillerymen who turn their guns toward this upcoming formation. Facing this incoming threat are 3 brigades from D.H. Hill's division who are filling the void in the cornfield. Though Hill's men won the race to the corn, they soon find to their dismay that the pasture just north of the field is slightly higher, allowing the Federals to have the edge in the fight. When Mansfield comes within view of Hill's Confederates, he pitches his men right into the fray. However, not long into the fight, Mansfield, who is just behind the front line, is hit in the chest, a wound that proves fatal, forcing Brigadier General Alpheus S. Williams, the ranking division commander, to assume command of the 12th Corps. For the time being, Hill's men hold their own in the corn, only until the already skittish men of Garland's brigade flee when Federals arrive on their right flank, reminding them of their chaotic route 3 days prior at South Mountain. This new threat is the lead element of Brigadier General George S. Green's 2nd Division of 12th Corps, arriving to flank the Confederate position in the East Woods. Colquitt and Ripley are not prepared to meet this new threat and are sent reeling as their flank is rolled up. With Hill's line broken in the corn, the path towards the Dunkard Church lays open. In the West Woods, Jackson and his lieutenants are scrambling to reform their shattered units to stop this breakthrough. With no organized opposition in his front, Greene makes a concentrated drive towards the Dunkard Church, forcing S.D. Lee's battalion to pull back. With no Confederates in the vicinity, the Federals capture the church. Hoping to exploit Greene's success, Hooker rides up to survey the situation. As the general rides forward on his conspicuous white horse, he is shot in the foot by a Confederate sharpshooter, a wound that forces him to quit the field, forcing General Meade to take over Hooker's place as the 1st Corps commander. With Hooker out of the picture and nobody aware of the plan, the Union momentum stalls at the Dunkard Church. Urgent calls for reinforcements go out on both sides. Despite holding on for hours in the face of repeated assaults, Jackson's line has finally broken. If Federal reinforcements can properly arrive to fill the gap, Lee's entire army might be at risk. While Hood's division makes its counterattack in the cornfield at 7:20 a.m., General Sumner and his 2nd Corps are ordered to the front by McClellan. General Sumner is an old dragoon officer who loves to fill a battle and is known for his booming voice. Once the order arrives, Sumner and his 2nd Division under Brigadier General John Sedgwick waste no time moving out. However, the other 2 divisions are slower to start and soon lose sight of Sedgwick. When McClellan ordered Sumner to the front, he expected to have the 65-year-old general under Hooker's direction, but Hooker and Mansfield are both wounded. With no general on the scene, Sumner becomes the commanding general on the Union right flank, precisely where McClellan did not want him. When the old general reaches the East Woods, he holds a short council with General Williams about the situation, and surmises that the end of the Union flank rests at the Dunkard Church. Seeing this, Sumner plans to attack straight ahead into the West Woods and then pivot south to turn the Confederate left flank. Sumner hopes his flanking attack will break the Confederate left flank for good. To ensure his attack succeeds, Sumner aligns Sedgwick's division into 3 long lines 50 yards apart. Once ready, the division advances into the West Woods at 9 a.m. As Sedgwick's men enter the woods, the only resistance they meet is from a small contingent of Jackson's men who scatter into the trees. For the moment, everything is going according to plan. Sumner has reached the Confederate flank and will soon start his decisive flanking attack. The rebels are nowhere to be seen. Sumner's plan is working perfectly. At the same time Sumner was ordered to the front, Lee sent McClellan's tired division to assist Jackson in a struggle at the Dunkard Church and arrived at the perfect time to attack Sedgwick's exposed flank. Seeing this perfect opportunity, Jackson also commenced the remnants of his division to the attack. McClellan and Jackson hit Sedgwick's division at the same time and completely smashed the Federal formation. In less than 30 minutes, Sedgwick and 2,200 of his men become casualties, and the rest of the division is sent reeling in complete disarray. Sergeant William Andrews of the 1st Georgia recalled that, where the Federal line stood, the ground is covered in blue. Sumner's grand flank attack is undone. The victorious Confederates chase their fleeing foe north until they are halted by a makeshift line by the remnants of the 1st and 12th Corps. While Sedgwick's men are retreating, General Williams sends in Gordon's 3rd Brigade to assist Sumner, unknowingly straight towards McClellan's right flank. As they advance, they are met by Walker's division, who swing to the right to protect McClellan's flank. Gordon's men find themselves in an awkward position and retreat after suffering heavy casualties. With the counterattack out of momentum, the Confederates, content with their accomplishment, fall back to the West Woods. Meanwhile, at the Pry House, McClellan has hoarded over half his army behind the Antietam, enabling his subordinates to only make limited gains against the Confederates in their piecemeal attacks. Despite holding the numerical edge over Lee, McClellan is fearful that the Confederates outnumber his army and takes every precaution to ensure his own force is not destroyed in the battle. By 10 a.m., Lee parried every thrust McClellan had made against his line and made counterstrokes of his own. After 4 hours of desperate fighting, over 1,300 men lay strewn on the ground dead and dying, and the battle is far from being over. With more of Sumner's men arriving, the battle shifts toward the center of Lee's line. While Sedgwick's division is being smashed in the West Woods, Brigadier General William H. French finds himself alone without standing orders and is unsure what to do next. French decides to support the nearest Federals, Green's 2nd Division, who's holding on tenaciously to the Dunkard Church, and moves south from the East Woods. Facing this incoming threat is D.H. Hill's division, who is holding the center of Lee's line at the Sunken Road. Though Hill is lacking men, he arguably holds the strongest position on the field. While French's division is approaching, General Lee rides the lines to encourage the men. As the general nears, Colonel John B. Gordon of the 6th Alabama declares, "These men are going to stay here, General, till the sun goes down or victory is won." Impressed with these words, the confident Lee rides on to check the rest of his line. At 9:30 a.m., the first of French's men attack the Sunken Road. As Weber's green men crest the ridge in front of the road, they are mowed down by the entrenched Confederates. After only a few minutes of fighting, they retreat after suffering heavy casualties. Seeing Weber's men run, Longstreet orders Rhodes to counterattack, but his Alabamians are mowed down in turn. Once Weber's men retreat off the crest, Morris's inexperienced brigade begins their attack, but they too are routed after a short but bloody firefight. Seeing Morris's men retreat, French drives in his last brigade, Kimball's veterans from the valley. Kimball orders his men to charge with their bayonets, but gets nowhere close to the Confederate line. After an hour of fighting, French does not make a dent in the rebel line and is forced to pull his men back. As the fighting heats up in the Sunken Road, more and more men are sent into the fray. At 10:30 a.m., Major General Israel B. Richardson arrives on the scene with his 1st Division, the last of Sumner's 2nd Corps. Richardson's division contains some of the best men in the Army of the Potomac, all veterans from the Peninsula Campaign. On the Confederate side, Major General Richard H. Anderson arrives with his division to shore up Hill's flanks. But just as he positions his men, he is shot in the thigh and is forced to quit the field, which sends his division into chaos. With Anderson out of the picture, Brigadier General Roger A. Pryor is tasked with wrangling control of the division. Leading Richardson's attack on the Sunken Road is Marr's Irish Brigade, hailing from New York City. As the Irishmen advance toward the Confederates, Father William Corby rides along their lines, shouting words of conditional absolution for those who are about to die. The Irishmen come upon French's left flank and pitches into the defending Confederates. They fire a rugged volley and then charge their lines, but just like French's men, they are shredded in their assault. After losing 540 men, they pull back. During the assault, Brigadier General George B. Anderson has his ankle smashed by a Minay ball, a wound that proves mortal. Meanwhile, in the center road's line, Colonel Gordon, already suffering from 4 bullet wounds, finally goes down after being hit a 5th time and is carried off the field. After the Irish Brigade has retreated from the front, Richardson sends Caldwell's brigade in as support. These men luckily find a knoll that allows them to enfilade the road. The Confederate defenders are not prepared for this attack and break, leaving heaps of dead strewn along the road. Hill's defensive line is crumbling. Despite this pressure, it is not the Federals who ultimately break the line, but the Confederates themselves. Amidst the chaos, misinterpreted orders see the entire center break apart, completely destroying Hill's line for good. Seeing the Confederate line collapse, Richardson unleashes his men to capitalize on their success, storming into the Piper farm and driving a wedge deep into the Confederate center. However, the Federals do not go far as Longstreet masses his artillery and Hill leads spirited counterattacks that only barely stop Richardson's onslaught. In conjunction with his defensive moves to halt the Federals, Longstreet orders attacks on the Federals' flanks to relieve some pressure on his position. To assist him, McClellan sends Colonel John R. Cook with the 3rd Arkansas and 27th North Carolina against French's right flank. Cook's counterattack catches the Federals by complete surprise, forcing many to turn to face his unexpected assaults. Despite his successful attack on the Federal flank, Cook's small force could not hold their position for long and is forced to retreat in the face of mounting odds. Back at the Sunken Road, as Richardson is waiting for reinforcements to finish off the Confederate center, he is hit by a Confederate shell that forces him to quit the field. With no ranking commander on the scene, McClellan steps in and sends Brigadier General Winfield Scott Hancock to assume command of Richardson's 1st Division. Hancock, however, is given no orders to continue the attack. With the mortal wounding of General Richardson, the Federal assault against Lee's center runs out of steam. For now, even though Lee's center has been battered and bruised, it holds firm. By 1 p.m., after almost 4 hours of desperate fighting, the contest for the Sunken Road had come to a close, claiming over 5,500 casualties. This massive casualty list would give this area of the battle a new name, the Bloody Lane. As the Battle of Antietam consumes the fields and woods surrounding the Dunker Church, Generals Ambrose Burnside, Jacob D. Cox, and the 12,000-strong 9th Corps sit idly by waiting for orders to attack. Burnside is still annoyed about losing control of the 1st Corps and still considers himself a wing commander, and thus any orders he receives, he relays them to Cox. When McClellan sends his orders for Burnside to attack, he wants to take Lee's attention off of Hooker. However, his orders arrive too late to prevent that from happening. By 10 a.m., orders for Burnside to commence his attack arrive. Facing Burnside's 9th Corps is the Lower Bridge, also known as the Roebuck Bridge. This is the only passable point over the Antietam besides the Middle Bridge further north, or Snavely's Ford almost a mile to the south. Not only does Burnside have to cross the bridge, it is dominated by the terrain on the Confederate side, which allows the Confederates to shoot down upon anybody who comes near. Seeing the natural strength of the position, Longstreet leaves only the 2nd and 20th Georgia from Toombs Brigade, only 400 men, to guard the bridge, To kickstart his attack, Burnside selects Crook's brigade from Colonel Eliakim P. Scammond's Kanawha Division to attack the bridge. While the 11th Connecticut and Crook's brigade attack, Brigadier General Isaac P. Rodman's division is sent south across over the Antietam at Snavely's Ford. Once all is ready, Crook begins his attack, but it soon breaks down after the Nutmeggers fail to locate the bridge and receive punishing fire from Toombs' men. After the retreat of the 11th Connecticut, Cox orders Nagel's brigade to attack with a direct approach. Yet, just as his regiments get into the open, they are cut down by accurate Confederate fire and are forced to retreat as well. By noon, Burnside is nowhere close to taking the bridge, frustrating General McClellan. Agitated with the lack of progress, McClellan sends Inspector General Sackett to confront Burnside about his apparent lack of effort to take the bridge. Burnside responds to Sackett saying, "McClellan appears to think I am not trying my best to carry this bridge. You are the third or fourth one who has been to me this morning with similar orders." At 12:30 p.m., Brigadier General Samuel D. Sturgis is ordered again to attack the bridge. This time, he taps Ferrero in his twin 51st, the 51st New York and 51st Pennsylvania. Before they attack, they ask Ferrero for a reward if they can take the bridge, in which he promises to return their whiskey rations if they succeed. At 1 p.m., the twin 51st attack and race towards the bridge. However, after almost 3 hours of firing, the Georgians are running low on ammunition. Unable to stop Ferrero's determined assaults, or Rodman's approaching division from Snavely's Ford, they fall back in good order. With the departure of the Confederates, the twin 51st finally capture the bridge. Despite losing the bridge, the stalwart Georgians have held back Burnside's entire corps for 3 crucial hours. Seeing the lower bridge fall into Federal hands, the scattered Confederate units south of Sharpsburg fall back closer to the town, preparing for their final defense against Burnside's 9th Corps. With no enemies in the vicinity, Burnside pushes his men over the bridge and forms his divisions on the western side of the Antietam. At his position, Burnside has a clear view of Sharpsburg and only a small rebel force in his way. Facing this growing threat south of Sharpsburg is D.R. Jones' division, stripped threadbare by leader reinforced Jackson in this fight. If no reinforcements arrive soon to help Jones, very little stopping Burnside from pushing his way into Sharpsburg and cutting Lee's army off from Virginia. With less than 4 hours of daylight remaining, Burnside might be able to bring the Battle of Antietam to a decisive conclusion. At 3 p.m., Cox orders his divisions forward, directing them towards the town. Confederate batteries on Cemetery Hill fire with great effect upon the advancing blue lines, but this is not enough to stop their momentum. On Cox's right flank, a few Federal units managed to reach the outskirts of Sharpsburg and battle with the various Confederate lines in the streets. With limited manpower on hand and no support incoming, the Confederates are feeling the full pressure of the Federal assault. As this juggernaut continues its advance, the thin Confederate defense starts to crumble, causing pandemonium within the streets of Sharpsburg. Wagon crews bolt from the scene, civilians flee from their houses, and skulkers run amok. At the Confederate headquarters, Lee watches this crisis unfold in front of him, knowing that only one person can save the army in its hour of need. Just as Lee and many of the Confederates have lost all hope of staving off total defeat, dust clouds are spotted rising up in the direction of Ballard's Ford. As this unknown column nears the front, Lee asks his aide what flags they are flying. The lieutenant answers, they are flying Confederate and Virginia flags. Relieved, Lee responds by saying, it is A.P. Hill from Harpers Ferry. After completing the parole of the Harpers Ferry garrison, Hill pushed his men at breakneck speed to complete the 17-mile march to Sharpsburg to reinforce their comrades. Similar speeds that Jackson's foot cavalry marched back in the Shenandoah Valley. The determination exerted by A.P. Hill and his troops have allowed them to reach the battlefield at the right place at the right time, on the unsuspecting left flank of Burnside's attacking columns. At 3:30, the Federal left flank spots Hill's light division as they approach the battle. General Rodman, whose division is in the path of Hill's attack, rides to his left flank to warn his men but is shot down, a wound that will prove to be mortal. Rodman becomes the third Federal general to die from the battle. The inexperienced Federals in Rodman's division are unable to tell the Confederates apart from their own as Hill's men took many blue uniforms from Harpers Ferry. This confusion, along with Rodman's wounding, causes a total breakdown in command in the advancing Federal division. As Rodman's division falters, so does the rest of the 9th Corps, resulting in the collapse of Burnside's entire attack. Some units try to fight but are soon forced back as the initiative swings in the favor of the Confederates. General Branch, while pushing his men forward, is shot in the head and killed instantly, becoming the third Confederate general to die in the battle. As the clock strikes 5:30 p.m., the brutal fight that has raged south of Sharpsburg grinds to a halt as the final units of Burnside's wing retreat to the creek. Despite having loads of men in reserve, McClellan is still worried that the Confederates hold the numerical advantage and refuses to commit any more men to the fight. With McClellan resting on his laurels and Lee vigorously holding on to his position, the Battle of Antietam comes to a close as night shrouds over the battlefield. Despite breaking the Confederate line many times throughout the battle, McClellan is unable to exploit any advantage his men gained. Even with a 30,000-man advantage, McClellan is unable to apply his numerical superiority as Lee shifted his troops from one point of the attack to the next, ensuring that he matched every one of McClellan's strokes. Almost every man in the Army of Northern Virginia was thrown into the fight at one point or another. Because of his boldness and skillful use of his manpower, Lee staved off total defeat, saving his army for another day. However, both sides have suffered a fearful toll. Of the roughly 50,000 men McClellan committed to the battle, he suffered over 1/4 casualties, while Lee suffered almost 1/3 from his entire army. With a combined total of 22,727 casualties, the Battle of Antietam becomes the bloodiest day in American history. Despite the terrible number of casualties his men suffer from the day-long battle, Lee chooses to stay put the next day. As the sun rose on September 18, 1862, it revealed the harvest of death reaped from the previous day's battle. However, even with the Confederate army severely weakened, while also holding a better position from the day before, and with an additional 30,000 fresh troops, McClellan does not have the stomach to resume the battle. The general still believes that the Confederates outnumber him and is content to keep what he has gained. For the rest of the day, an unofficial truce is declared to help collect the wounded and bury some of the dead. With no attack coming from McClellan, Lee orders his army to retreat back across the Potomac that night. On the 19th, McClellan orders Porter's 5th Corps to follow the Confederate retreat, yet he bites off more than he can chew and is beaten back across the river at the Battle of Shepherdstown. As the last Confederate crosses back into Virginia, Lee's much anticipated invasion of the North ends. Due to miscalculations in both of his lieutenants and opponents, he almost lost his entire army. Yet through sheer luck, determination, and Federal cautiousness, Lee is able to keep his army alive, but only by the skin of its teeth. McClellan, even after being given the exact marching orders of his enemy, is unable to properly take advantage of what is placed in his hands. Though he struck hard and fast at South Mountain, McClellan fell back into his normal character and allowed Lee to once again dominate the mental battle between the two commanders. This, along with the improper use of his army at the Battle of Antietam, enabled the Confederate army not only to survive, but also fight him to a standstill. Thus, due to the exhausting campaign and battle that raged throughout Maryland, both sides set up camp on opposite sides of the Potomac and allows the campaigning season of 1862 to come to a close. However, even though the battle ended in a tactical draw, the retreat of the Confederate Army 2 days later enables Lincoln to claim a victory that the president has been patiently waiting for so he can announce his preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. The proclamation declares that the Confederate States do not return to the Union by January 1st, 1863. Slaves under Confederate control will be forever free. This document will have a profound effect on the war as it dissuades England and France from recognizing the Confederacy, forcing the Confederates to fight the war alone. From now on, the North will not only fight to restore the Union, but to end the institution that is slavery.